Back when I was a kid growing up with the original PlayStation, there was one role-playing game that took the gaming world by storm and became one of the absolute best RPGs of all time. And that game was Final Fantasy VII. Released back in 1997, this game definitely had it all. Pretty fun gameplay, amazing graphics for the time, and a very captivating story. The success of this title ultimately led to a sequel being released on DVD and Blu-ray, and a prequel being released on the PlayStation Portable years later. So you can imagine the excitement that all of us fans felt when the remake was announced back in 2015, and finally was released back in April of 2020. However, recently that feeling was completely dashed and replaced with absolute frustration after finding out that the game made its debut on the PC platform just recently. So after calming down just a little bit, I reluctantly decided to make the purchase to hopefully experience this amazing remake in a new and better way. And for the most part, I was not disappointed. The emphasis, however, is on most. So was this purchase actually worth it? Or was it an absolute waste of money? Let's analyze that. When the Final Fantasy VII Remake was released back on April the 10th of 2020, the only console that you would find the game on was the PlayStation 4, where within the first 3 days went on to sell over 3.5 million copies worldwide, making it not only one of the biggest launches for the PlayStation 4, but it became the fastest selling PS4 exclusive. The game would also be given the Enhanced for PS4 Pro treatment as well. And then, 1 year later, on June the 10th, 2021, the game would finally get released on the new PlayStation 5 platform, and this version will be known as the Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate, which brought about a bit of a graphic improvement, support for 60 frames per second, and featured a side story where you play as the Wutai ninja Yuffie. And then 6 months later, on December 16th, 2021, the game finally made its debut on the PC platform, with a pretty hefty price tag of 115 Australian dollars, about the same price as the PlayStation 5 version in Australia. And I guess that pretty much leads into answering the question of, is that hefty price tag really worth it? Well, let's begin with a graphics comparison between the PS4 Pro and the PC.
Fight!
Now, the main things that we'll be focusing on for these next few clips are colors, textures, lighting, and draw distances. And so far, when it comes to the color aspect, it's looking pretty obvious that the PC version is already looking much more vibrant and lively than it does on the PS4 Pro. And when it comes down to the textures, they have also been given quite a nice bump, so even small things such as clothing and gear, for example, are much more clear and detailed than they were before. And the way the lighting has been improved for this version definitely speaks for itself, and it makes a huge world of difference to the atmosphere and surrounding environments when compared to the PS4 Pro. And when it comes down to the objects that are in the distance, I'm pretty much going to have to let this clip pretty much speak for itself. There's really no way to compare that. And while I don't have a PS5 on hand to do a direct comparison with, I have found from a different source that the graphics difference between the PC and the PS5, while present, is pretty minuscule overall. So whichever version that you choose to buy is completely down to personal preference. Now when it comes to gameplay, on the other hand, the PS4 runs this game at a maximum of 30 frames per second, whether you're running it at 1080p or 4K. And with the PS5 introducing support for 60 frames per second, this makes things like battle sequences a lot more fluid and responsive. And the PC once again takes this up another notch by offering support for 120 frames per second, double the frame rate of the PlayStation 5. And over on my gaming PC with the Ryzen 7 3700X and an RTX 3070 GPU, running this game at 4K with the graphics settings maxed out returned an average frame rate of 108 frames per second, with the minimum frame rate coming back as 31 FPS and 1% and 0.1% lows of 36 and 23 FPS. However, the minimum frame rate is caused by an issue that I'll mention very soon. The minimum system requirements of a 3rd generation i5 or an AMD FX 8350 with a GTX 780 or RX 480 are best suited for a nice 1080p experience. However, a 3rd generation i7 or a Ryzen 3 3100 with a GTX 1080 or RX 5700 are more suited for a nice 1440p experience. Although, as you can see here, that isn't necessarily the case sometimes, as this version seems to have a bit of stuttering issues that even affect users with components that are more powerful than the recommended specs. And while these stutters are far from the worst that I've ever seen and aren't necessarily game breaking, they are definitely very annoying when they occur. So please Squaresoft, please fix this really soon. There are 2 other negatives that I feel are very underwhelming for this version, and one of those is the lack of customizable options in the menu. There's no support for native full screen or any support for 21:9 aspect ratios, so for those of us with ultra wide monitors, we're pretty much stuck in Sci-Fi City, which I can see for a number of users is a major inconvenience. The lack of graphical options is pretty underwhelming as well, where the only options available are low or high textures and low or high shadows, and that's it. It's a shame too that the supported maximum frame rate is only at 120 frames per second, so for those of us with monitors of 144Hz or higher can't necessarily take advantage of our monitor's full potential. Although the game is still pretty smooth for the most part, except for when those little stutters kick in. And probably don't bother about HDR as it seems to be broken. And the final negative will probably have to be the price. $75 or 115 Australian dollars for this release at this time is a little bit off-putting, especially when the PlayStation 5 and graphics cards are both very hard to get your hands on right now and stupidly expensive at the same time. Thanks, scalpers. But the one redeeming thing about the cost on the PC version is that all the DLC that was previously released comes included as standard, and with some gamers agreeing that that justifies the cost and other gamers disagreeing, this effectively puts the price a little bit onto the controversial side. So is it worth getting the Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PC right now? Well, that depends on a few different factors. Which is your more desired system of choice? Do you find the minor stutters to be major? Is it really worth that price even with the included DLC? Well, in my opinion, if you are a die-hard fan of the series like me, and you have a gaming computer from the last 5 to 7 years and that's your preferred platform, then I'd say go for it if you haven't done so already. It's overall a major improvement from the PS4 version, and those included extras do make a really nice touch. Otherwise, maybe hold off for just a little bit longer until it goes on sale. But in the meantime, overall, the Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PC definitely falls into my recommended list. And this wraps it up. Thanks for watching, guys. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more future content headed your way, and be sure to give me a like and follow on my social medias, links in the video description below, and if I don't see you in the next video, it will be in the ring. Game on!